So, folks, on September 19th, after months of work, the folks that you are going to meet today introduced the Ecological Benefits Framework that was during Climate Week in New York. It was an event that was oversubscribed with more than 150 people on the waiting list. So we're opening the conversation up today to share with everyone interested. What is the Ecological Benefits Framework? It's an answer to a simple question. What are the companies, nonprofits, and community projects that we're considering funding doing for the planet? As many of you tracking the rapidly evolving field of environmental, social, and governance, or ESG reporting know, materiality metrics that are being used are controversial. The International Sustainability Standards Board, which was established by the United Nations COP26 to deliver global guidelines for sustainability disclosure in capital markets around the world, is reportedly preparing to issue its recommendations, which address only single materiality or the direct financial risk a business will face as a result of its environmental and social decisions. In short, it requires the disclosure of fiduciary risk, but not the consequences of those business decisions for nature, the atmosphere, and the species that live on planet Earth. Enter the Ecological Benefits Framework, or EBF, as you will hear it referred to today, a platform for reporting the benefits created by business, governments, for and nonprofit projects, and more. The EBF mends the shortcomings of financial-only ESG reporting, providing comparable metrics that quantify the positive impacts of a company, a product, or a project on the air, water, soil, biodiversity, equity, and carbon of planet Earth, the things humans share with every other living creature. It gives us an accounting system for restoration and regeneration to allow investors, philanthropists, executives, and citizens to make informed decisions based on easily comparable data. Today, we'll share the EBF framework and discuss its early application in financial and environmental restoration decisions, as well as how it can be extended to support informed decision-making in every walk of life. Our speakers today are Douglas Gayeton. He is the information architect for the Lexicon, and he led the creation of the EBF by a community of more than 200 contributors. Doug Heske, he is the CEO of Newday Impact Investing, which will be the first financial services firm to apply the EBF to craft Earth-positive portfolios. We're also joined by Ashlan Cousteau, journalist and environmental advocate at EarthEcho International. Ashlan and her husband Philippe are renowned naturalists and TV personalities spreading the word about ocean health. Also, Andrea Kavanaugh, Director for Antarctic and Southern Ocean Conservation at the Pew Bertarelli Ocean Legacy Program, Ted Schmidt, Senior Director for the Allen Institute for AI, Lauren Sirota, co-founder and advisor at Funga, which is a climate collective using the EBF, Drea Burbank, founder of Savimbo, a fair trade biodiversity credits program, and Matt Zimmer, Director of Governance Research at Newday Impact Investing. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe. I'm the CEO of Earth 911, and I'll be serving as your moderator today. By the way, there is going to be a test of FEMA's National Emergency Alert System during our session today, so don't be alarmed if your phone gets upset. I'm going to be handing this over to Douglas Gayeton. Douglas, you've been working on the program now for quite some time. Why don't you take it away and explain what we're doing?
Thanks, Mitch. I'm sorry for that hiccup. The EBF really began with a really simple observation. I can tell you what we're really good at as a planet. We're really good at extraction. We've been perfecting it for the past 12,000 years. But there's a problem with being really good at something like extraction, which is that you contribute to all of those things on the left. And it's amazing. We're just almost in 2024, and our global response to these existential crises are carbon markets and, for the most part, fractured ESG reporting. And that's really a problem. What we really need to have is a way to have a unified response to these challenges. And so we look at all the different ways that people are trying to define what they do and the impacts they're trying to create. And we certainly have to respect that everyone is going to be on a different path. But can we at least agree that we all want to reach the same destination? And our problem is that we look at all of our challenges that we face globally as somehow individual, as somehow not connected, or indicators of patterns that connect to a whole. Now, we can learn a lot from the software industry. with the advent of the mobile phone, came Bluetooth, which allows any phone to talk to any smart device. So it's not like a phone maker needs to go and make deals, individual deals with every smart doorbell and smart refrigerator and car, because that digital handshake, which is Bluetooth, handles that. And Bluetooth is actually a nonprofit. It's actually a nonprofit that adjudicates that handshake and has allowed the explosion of all kinds of technologies built around a common shared framework. So why can't we create a digital handshake for the planet? And how would you do that? Well, we brought that question to literally hundreds of organizations, and we began to explore that. And we used a model that we used at Lexicon called an accelerator. And what we did was we took what we had learned in our previous accelerators, which were on everything from regenerative agriculture to biodiversity to food as medicine to alternative proteins. And the thing that we learned, the takeaway we had from all of those different activators that we've done with almost 1,000 companies, all with funding from Google, we learned was this, that people increasingly are less focused on a certification and the practices associated with the certification and more focused on the impact. How are we going to change the world? And in all of those activators we've done, which is 24 in the food and agriculture space, a common denominator emerged. And that common denominator was that people care about 6 things: air, water, soil, biodiversity, equity, and carbon. And so we worked with this group to define a framework that would express those positive impacts. Again, air, water, soil, biodiversity, equity, and carbon. And collectively, we call them an ecological benefits framework. Now, we know that carbon markets are trying to address climate change, but you have to understand that carbon is just a fraction of a whole. If you really want to address global problems, you can't address them by just addressing pieces of it, because you can't tell me that biodiversity loss is less important than climate change. Biodiversity loss are forever events. They can't be undone. Equally important is desertification, water scarcity, a host of other problems that are creating existential challenges around the planet. And ironically, they're all connected. So what we need is a holistic framework to look at how we can respond collectively by leaning into positive impacts and focusing and targeting our energy on things that we can collectively problem solve together. When you start to build out a model like an ecological benefit framework, you can start to explain at a glance with a snapshot what somebody is doing and the positive impacts they're creating. You can look at things in terms of the data fidelity of a claim that somebody makes, whether it's self-reported or third-party verified or certified. You can see the range of benefits somebody's providing and the quality of that measurement data. And then you can actually create a portable use for that. So you can actually create data wallets where people have a common framework that they're working from. This is what the work of the team at the Ecological Benefits Framework is doing. And then we're also building tools to explain how financing ecological benefits works. And we're showing that regardless of the impact investor or sovereign or company or retail buyer or philanthropic family office, they can all contribute in their own way to supporting ecological benefits across these 6 impact areas in a focused and highly directed way. And so this tool that we are building will be able to show the entire value chain. I'd like to, in the essence of time, bring in other people from our activator. Drea is the founder of Savimbo, that works in Colombia and at the headwaters of the Amazon of the Amazon. And maybe Drea, you can share with us how EBF can help you as a person who creates projects explain more of a holistic model that goes beyond carbon.
All right, I'm here today because my friend Johnny has a jaguar in his backyard, and he started following it around with a video camera. And this activity changed his life. He stopped narco trafficking. He became a conservationist and a vegetarian. And at first he was ridiculed by the neighbors, but eventually he convinced 200 small farmers in his area to also become conservationists. And we asked ourselves, why did he do this? Because I think this kind of behavior change, so extreme in such an unfriendly environment, is really interesting. We decided that Johnny made this activity because the jaguar was beautiful, it was wild, and it was bigger than him. And that's the way I feel about our project, Savimbo, and that's the way the people in Savimbo feel about the world. I joined EBF as a project developer. So we joined from the South America. This is a NASA video showing carbon emissions for the year 2021, absorptions in South America, and emissions in North America. And the reason we joined the incubator is this is a planet-wide problem. And you really need planet friends around the planet because this is a coordinated solution. You can't just do it from one location. Obviously, there's been a lot of debate about nature carbon, but the truth is that trees have already been invented and we know they work. Right now, there's a big push within the community to switch over as well to tracking biodiversity. And so when we joined the EBF, we were already doing a carbon project, a nature-based carbon project, but we also wanted to add in the biodiversity workstream. So we're not alone in this. Science-Based Targets Network has added in a biodiversity measurement that's been announced recently. And then the Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosures is also adding in biodiversity. There's been a lot of debate within the community as to how difficult that's going to be to measure, and we've made some strides in that, which I can talk about directly if you guys have any questions. We made a methodology. So when we're looking at our project, the problem is primary forests cannot solely be quantified by carbon. So we work in the Colombian Amazon, up here where there's a bunch of deforestation going on, and we're protecting this biodiversity hotspot. And we work with 200 small farmers and now 30 different indigenous nations to sell climate credits directly so we can stop deforestation. But the problem is, and this is one reason why we joined EBF, is you can't solely say that primary forests are quantified by carbon. They also have biodiversity, including medicinal plants that are unique to their region. Equity is a huge issue when you're looking at on-the-ground action. If you do not include the locals, they will work against you. Water, also, I would say that locals are the ones who actually protect the forest. And if you can't find a way to pay them directly, you don't get the money where it matters. Water is the primary motivation of our farmers to participate. They believe in keeping the water clean. You can drink the water anywhere on our project, but also we're at the headwaters of the Amazon. So if we don't keep our water clean, the entire Amazon becomes contaminated. And neighboring sites have sold out to petroleum companies. And there's evidence that those contaminants are going all the way down the Amazon. We talk about air. When you look at organic farming and organic crops in the area, if you can't find a way to teach the farmers how to do that, then it contaminates the air and it hurts the insect life, which also contributes to the biodiversity. And then finally, soil. We do a lot of organic farming, agrobiodiversity crops. And when we're looking at carbon, the biochar, we put that back into the soil. And it becomes a critical part of fertility and the ability for small farmers to support themselves on small plots. I can talk about this all day, but what I really want to address is that our project was never going to be quantified properly by carbon credits alone. And most of the good projects, I would say, and the real differentiator in the market is projects with hardcore co-benefits. And when we aren't measuring the co-benefits properly, when we can't talk about them properly in a way that investors and clients and the international markets understand, we're never going to be able to protect these regions, which are holistically beneficial for the planet.
Thanks so much for sharing, Drea. Well, I think in lieu of, I think I can, here's Philip.
Here's Phil. Yeah.
Philip, maybe you could share with us the challenges that EBF faces. It's trying to bring together historically, which are two things that are never brought together, which is qualitative measurement and quantitative measurement. And why is it so important to bring those together when you talk about positive impacts?
Right. It's a fascinating question. And I think as soon as we delve into the realms of ecology, we realize pretty quickly that complexity really resides, within each of the benefits that we presented here, with EBF, but it's also at the intersection of these benefits. And when we think about ecology, in many ways, the ecology sort of lives between numbers and words. So between the quantitative and the qualitative in many ways. And when we utilize the quantitative methods, it's really important. We want to get to specificity. We want to get to granularity. We want to get to accuracy. But then we also need the qualitative aspects, because we also want to know what's not reflected in the numbers. We also want to know what information lives between the numbers. We want to understand how we unravel uncertainty, and uncertainty is a guaranteed part of these processes as we're trying to do this analysis. So I think EBF's job really is to bring together, as you're saying, Douglas, I think the reductionistic and the holistic approaches. Our job is to link those modes of analysis and really to tap the wisdom of the middle while respecting the different approaches. And I think that's what we really do best in this particular approach.
And then
the EBF
just
framework.
add on to that, Philip, historically, carbon markets have been very top down, and we need to create models that are bottom up. And quantitative measurement becomes a barrier to entry for many projects that don't either have the money for that type of measurement, the resources, or the expertise. And so as a proxy in the short term, we really need to understand how we have the global south more deeply integrated into these financial markets that can drive that change. And one of the ways to help them is to really look at qualitative measurement, which is that indigenous knowledge in a much different way. And I think that's one of the most powerful things about EBF, is that it really gives you a different way to factor the value of indigenous knowledge and practices and the vital role they play in qualitative measurement.
Exactly. And I would just add that it also provides the capacity really to do the opposite, to also help others into the quantitative analysis, when appropriate.
Yeah, exactly. So, Mitch, the work that we've been doing and everything we shared, the partnerships we develop with everybody from the World Food Program to the CGIARs has really shown that there's a need for something that can really simplify and make clear what are our objectives, what are the positive impacts that we're after, and I would invite the people on this live stream today to check out our Toe in the Water, the first sharing out of that work, which you can find at canyouchangethefuture.org.
Thank you very much, Douglas. Fascinating. I've got so many questions I want to follow up with, but we want to move on, and we'll get to questions later on. Folks, if you want to add your questions, we'll be asking them later. We've got about 40 minutes set aside for that conversation. So if you add them in chat, we'll be curating them and asking them later. I want to move on now to Doug Heske at Newday Impact, and let me get my window up here so that he can have his slides. You should be seeing them now. Take it away, Doug.
Mitch, thank you so much. So great to see you. And of course, everybody that's a part of this very, very important presentation. I want to share some opening comments here before we get into some of the specifics of the work that we're doing in association with EBF. It's difficult in a room full of 150 people that we had back in New York last week, or even on the call today, to get a sense of the scale of this effort that's going on behind the scenes at EBF. But what I can assure you, it is massive. And there are hundreds of people that are not just participants in this effort, but are leaning into this effort and making significant contributions to bringing this to the global marketplace so that it can be used as an important system for not just impact measurement, but also this important aspect of storytelling. One of the things that makes this so different is the holistic approach and how we get what basically are three drivers working together to make change. And the work that we're doing with the Ecological Benefits Framework, the Lexicon, and all of the people that are part of this is really designed to bring this idea of grant capital, investment capital, and perhaps, and most importantly, consumer and institutional behavior and decision-making behind this. Most of our work at Newday today is built around this idea of creation of market-based solutions for the change that we all want to see in the future. There's more than $500 billion of capital each year that's contributed to nonprofit organizations and NGOs that are doing the on-the-ground work that they and only they can do. We work with many of them, like EarthEcho International, represented by Ashlan and Philippe Cousteau, Jane Goodall Institute, the Georgia Bedell Foundation, and others. Of equal importance is the fact that we have a public investment market that is measured right now at approximately $124 trillion in size globally. The private market is about $10 trillion in size. And there's biblical amounts of capital right now that are flowing into the climate change space, which is super, super important. I want to share something that was conveyed to me a number of years ago from our friend Philippe Cousteau. When we talk about the grant capital marketplace and we talk about the investment capital marketplace, we have to find an intersection between the two of them. And as Philippe has always shared, we want a seat at both tables. So one of the questions that we've been asking ourselves is, how do we get people moving capital in the right direction? Most companies, particularly public companies, which in large part have been the chief contributors to environmental degradation, have adopted this philosophy as of late of doing things less badly, as opposed to taking approaches to fixing the problems that oftentimes they've created. And lastly, people who are at the forefront of climate impact, at least in their own minds, are rarely the people who have contributed much to climate change through their small carbon footprints. And this is the paradox. Climate change has been the defining symbol of humanity's collective relationship with the environment on our planet today. But every single one of us has a responsibility to address this and incorporate it every day into our lives. So why EBF? EBF is allowing Newday to create what we've defined as market-based solutions, using charitable capital, investment capital, and most importantly, consumer behavior in driving consumer decision-making and making sure that sustainability is measured in a contextual way. So what I'd like to do is to dive into a great example of this. For the past few years, we've been working directly with Philippe and Ashlan Cousteau at EarthEcho International and a host of other organizations on the creation of what is a market-based solution to address what is one of the most important environmental issues of our time and one of the most significant carbon sinks on our planet. So I'd like to introduce two characters here, Will and Bill Krill. And you may be wondering what these two little mischievous creatures have been up to. But this is the story about their lives. They live here in Antarctica. They are part of a 700 trillion creature army. And the most crazy thing of all, we as human beings are eating them. We're eating one of the most important carbon sinks on the planet today. Antarctica is oftentimes referred to as the heart of the ocean. It's the foundation of the food chain. And every day humans are sending fishing boats down, which capture Will and Bill's family members. And they aren't just fishing boats. I mean, they are sea scrapers, and some of them as large as football fields. The fishermen grind them up, Bill's and Will's family squeeze out the oil and put all that oil into capsules for nutraceuticals and other byproducts which are used in aquaculture feed, livestock feed, and also pet food. But despite the fact that there are many organizations and individuals that are fighting this fight to protect Will and Bill, the fishermen keep coming. So why is this so awful? Will and Bill do incredible things for our planet. They are one of the most important carbon sinks on our planet. They sequester approximately 23 million tons of carbon each year. That's equivalent to 18 million cars being taken off the road, 16 million homes worth of electricity usage. And in addition to the battle that they're fighting on the front line, they're fighting one on the back line as well called global warming. And it's the combination of these two factors that have created a really bad situation for them and their family members. And it's expected that the demand for krill, as driven by nutraceutical consumption, pet food, livestock feed, and aquaculture feed, is going to rise 8-fold over the next decade. The most crazy thing of all is that krill only serve as middlemen producing super omega-3s because they consume so much algae. But the good news is that we don't need to create a better, less harmful alternative. It already exists. And we're going to talk about that here today with Andrea Cavanaugh from Peru and Ashlan Cousteau from Ciboire. So how does this program work? And we're going to talk in greater detail about this. So this market-based solution is really designed to pull these three critical importance to drive transformation. Investment capital that are funding what is a Newday investment portfolio, and a large percent of those revenues are directed back into the oceans program so that it is fully sustainable. We are raising grant capital into the program to deliver what is a consumer behavioral campaign designed to impact consumer decision-making on a variety of different things after the first of the year. And then we are working very closely with the Ecological Benefits Framework team to drive what basically is identified as an activator that will encompass much of the work that we've talked about here too. So what I'd like to do is to pause and turn things over to Ashlan Cousteau and Andrea Cavanaugh for a deeper dive into the work that's going on in this program and why this is so critically important to the carbon climate environment, but also the ocean health environment.
Doug, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here with you all. Many colleagues and friends are on here, and that makes me smile. And I want to start by just echoing what Drea had said earlier. We are all connected, right? Everybody on this planet is connected. And one of the main things that connects us is our ocean. So if my last name sounds familiar, that is because my husband, Philippe Cousteau, is the third generation of a family that has dedicated their careers, their life to the ocean. It was over 75 years ago that his grandfather, Jacques Cousteau, put a funny looking contraption on his back and stepped in the Marin River for the first time and invented the aqualung. And it's still the same device that all of us scuba divers use today. That invention made him really want to spend just more time underwater and share what he was seeing. And he went on to invent underwater cameras, figure out how to capture sound, and then, of course, went on to produce many wonderful documentaries and television series like The Undersea World of Jacques Cousteau, which really brought the ocean to people's living rooms for the very first time and allowed people to see what was under the water swimming freely rather than see it as the trash we threw in or the fish and products that we pulled out of the ocean. So in that legacy, Philippe started EarthEcho International almost 20 years ago, which makes him seem really old, but I promised I wouldn't say it, but 20 years ago, EarthEcho International. And it was really on this idea that something that his grandfather and father, Philippe Sr., talked about all the time, and that is we can't talk about conservation without first talking about education. And we've all seen it. We've all seen the NGOs work so hard to make some changes, some political changes, only, especially in the United States, or for example, in the United States, 4 years later, to have the next party come in and erase all of that change. So what we really need to do is we need to focus on a youth strategy and a truly sustainable change for our planet, and a group of people that just know that our planet is not a political party. It is good for all of us. Also, that really led Philippe and I to start thinking that sustainability is not enough. We must start talking about restoration, and specifically where our ocean is concerned. And we are active on many boards. But the one I want to talk about today is Antarctica 2020. And I'm so glad that Andrea is on the call. She's going to get more into the details with you on this. But as you know, we started our work with Antarctica 2020. Our mission is to get 3 new marine protected areas in the Southern Ocean. And as Philippe and I were learning and getting up to speed on the issues and why these marine protected areas weren't being established, as Doug had just mentioned, it was for the krill fishery. And honestly, even being ocean advocates, it was something that wasn't on our radar. So we said, well, why? Why do people want the krill fishery? What are they doing with the krill, who, as Doug mentioned, is part of the largest carbon sink of our planet? They are the basis of our entire ocean food web. And they're also part of our largest oxygen producing cycle on the planet. So yeah, they're a little important. And the answer shocked us. People want the krill for omega-3 supplements, mostly. 70% of their market value is for omega-3s. And the kicker for us is fish, krill don't make their own omega-3s. They get them from eating algae. So this is just one of those examples where humans are just kind of doing something that's dumb, that is solvable. And it truly is the largest climate catastrophe that we are facing that no one is talking about. So we have dedicated a lot of our time to raise the awareness of this issue, to try to get these marine protected areas established, and also let consumers know directly that there are better options out there. And we are doing part of that by creating our own line called Sea Voir Wellness, where we will start making omega-3s just to really try to knock the knees out of the krill fishery down in Antarctica, and also hopefully the fish oil industry. But I think that, it's just really important for us all to remember how important the Southern Ocean is. It is very far away, but it truly is the lifeline of our planet in terms of food, oxygen, carbon sequestration, and helping to regulate the temperature of our planet. So with that, I want to pass this off to Andrea, who is an amazing colleague and just a rock star for the planet and the Southern Ocean. So Andrea, if you want to dig more into the Southern Ocean, the floor is yours.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Ashlan. And it was a pleasure to listen to that and your passion and excitement for the Southern Ocean, because that's something I share. I have been working to try to protect the Southern Ocean pretty much my entire career, and have worked on a number of issues from Chilean sea bass, which we all call Patagonian or toothfish in the Antarctic. And been working to regulate these markets to try to make sure that we're getting, making sure that the fish that we're getting is legal, making sure that the ecosystem is actually protected. So it's great to be working with you and talking to you about this stuff. A little bit more about Antarctic krill. I just also find them fascinating, and I love your love for them. I really enjoy your love for them, Doug. But Antarctic krill are actually about the size of an adult human pinky. And that's actually larger than most commonly sold shrimp species. And people keep talking about krill as if they're tiny, tiny little things. And they are tiny. And if you're looking at maybe phytoplankton, but in terms of zooplankton, they're pretty big. And they're actually thought to comprise the largest biomass of any animal species on Earth except for humans. So there's that many krill that they outweigh all the other animal species except for humans. That's a lot of krill. And one really cool fact about krill is that they can glow in the dark. And experts believe that they do this to communicate with one another as they swarm, or possibly to confuse predators that are coming after them. Krill are at the center of the entire Antarctic food web. Without them, we would not have creatures like whales and seals and penguins. So they're really critically important to the Antarctic. In fact, in the one part of the Antarctic alone, the Antarctic Peninsula, krill provide 96% of the calories for all seabirds and animals in that one area. As Doug and Ashlan have mentioned, that krill are really important for the Southern Ocean's biological carbon sink. And how that works is that basically krill feed on algae that's absorbed carbon dioxide at the sea surface. And then they migrate in really large stream swarms to the deep water, and then excrete their waste, and then transfer that amount of carbon into the ocean depths where it just stays there. So it's really important that they keep being able to do that cycle of consuming the phytoplankton and bringing it down deep to sequester it. Sorry, Ashlan told you a little bit about why people are catching krill. Just if you're curious, the largest fishers for krill are Norway, China, Korea, the Ukraine, and Chile. That's pretty much it. Just those countries are the ones that are fishing for krill and are the ones that we need to convince to put in place protected areas and better regulations. And so climate change is a huge issue there. The krill have adapted to the Southern Ocean's really cold waters, and they depend on sea ice to complete their life cycle because they actually use it as a place for breeding, and also they eat the algae off the bottom of the sea ice. And what is really terrifying this year is that it is a record low sea ice year, and not by just a little bit. It's actually by a million square kilometers lower than it normally is. So nobody knows how this is going to affect krill populations going into the future. And scientists say that ocean acidification that comes about by climate change can also affect the development of the krill eggs. And it could cause krill populations to collapse as soon as 2300. So, fishing is very concentrated. We need to figure out how to stop it from just being in this very small area around the Antarctic Peninsula, which is the fastest warming place on the planet. And then, the krill fishery likes to say that they are sustainable because they're catching less than 1% of the total krill population, but that doesn't tell the whole story. Because what's really going on is that the fishermen are going into these very, very small spots, targeting areas where the predators are, where the penguins are feeding, where the whales are feeding, and they go in and they fish right on top of them because that's a swarm of krill that they can easily just scoop right up. So the problem isn't how much, it's where they're doing it. And that's a really important thing that people need to realize. The other thing that that could work is, in addition to better regulations, are marine protected areas, which is something CAMLAR is working on. CAMLAR is the Commission for the Conservation of Antarctic Marine Living Resources, and it's made up of 27 different countries who go down and make decisions about how you want to regulate that particular area. Marine protected areas are important because they can increase biodiversity and species density, and then they can also minimize other threats, so they can help the ecosystems build resilience to climate change. So that's MPAs are really important. I think on a global scale, you may have heard that people are talking about the fact that we need to protect 30% of the ocean by 2030. And the 30% of the ocean starts in the Antarctic. If we can't protect these areas that are already a global commons, that don't have actually a ton of industrial fishing going on to begin with, there is some, but there's not as much as other parts of the ocean. So, protecting the 30% really starts in Antarctica. And CAMLAR has already agreed to do this. I think I gave you a map there, Mitch, if you want to pull that up. You can see there's a network of marine protected areas that CAMLAR has proposed for the Southern Ocean. And I guess it's actually on your map too there, Doug, that's showing right now. So, but these marine protected areas ring the continent of Antarctica. And so we have, there we go. And then it also has a nice little picture of a krill there. That's what a real krill looks like, even though your cartoon character is a lot cuter maybe than the real guy. So these protected areas ring the continent of Antarctica, and they would stop krill fishing as well as toothfish fishing and any other kind of fishing that could take place. And that gives the species there a chance to build resilience. So I just wanted to say one more thing, and that is, I've been part of a campaign on toothfish. It was called Take a Pass on Chilean Sea Bass. Back in the early 2000s, toothfish was being really illegally overcaught, and we were able to do a market-based campaign to get chefs to stop serving it, and that caused governments to actually put in place that stop the illegal fishery. So I'm a big believer in the market being able to drive change, not just in consumers, but also in regulations and government.
Thank you, Andrea. And now we want to turn to Matt Zimmer from Newday Impact and bring back Doug Heske as well to talk about the process that they are using to review portfolio options and put together Earth positive investments.
Mitch, thank you very much. And just before we have Matt get started here, I want to add to what Andrea just shared about telling the whole story. And I think this is what's so critical about the Ecological Benefits Framework is that it allows us to tell the whole story. It's not just about krill harvesting, but it's about all of those additional impacts that are made on air, water, soil, biodiversity, equity, and carbon related to that. So Matt is going to talk about that today and how we are using the Ecological Benefits Framework as a mechanism for our own impact measurement. And then ultimately, this really important storytelling aspect of this. And we've spent so much time as an organization over the last 6 years thinking about what our consumers want, how they want impact metrics and outcomes delivered to them so they don't feel that humans, everybody can understand. So with that, it's our pleasure to introduce Matt Zimmer, who is the head of ESG governance research at Newday, or governance research at Newday. And Matt's been working hard with the analytics team and the investment team to bring about what is an understanding of how EBF is laid into our investment process, both today on a go-forward basis.
Thanks, Doug. Well, we're using the EBF framework as part of a multi-step process to develop genuine portfolios that have measurable impact. So we're starting off with a universe of about 5,000 companies. That's international and domestic companies. And then we're using a quantitative screen to do an initial screen of the companies to find companies that have a general alignment with our investments theme. So for example, ocean health. And then as the next step, we look at a company's financial return potential, both from a macro perspective and from a fundamental perspective, to decide which companies are good candidates for inclusion in our portfolio, both from a thematic perspective and from a potential financial return perspective. And then taking those candidate companies, what we're doing is we're using the EBF framework to develop portfolios of each of those companies to give us the what each of those companies are doing across the 6 pillars. So that gives us a lens to look more deeply at what the actual impacts are that those companies are taking part in. So instead of looking at just an ESG score, which has all kinds of problems with what you can actually determine from an ESG score, you're looking at it from a more comprehensive perspective. So looking at each of these 6 pillars across each of the companies, we develop profiles for each of our candidate companies. And we're through that process, we're able to develop the feeling for which companies take their responsibilities to all stakeholders seriously. And then using those EBF profiles, we're selecting 20 to 30 companies that have shown genuine positive impacts across the 6 pillars of the EBF. And then in the final step, we put those companies together into an overall portfolio controlling for different risk factors and give and in that way, we're able to develop a portfolio that has genuine measurable impact.
Thanks, Matt. Now, Doug, you are also planning a new multi-asset class fund, which will apply this. Can you talk a little about what the one fund is going to do?
The best way to describe this, Mitch, is to share a conversation that Douglas Gayeton and I had a number of months ago. And our historical approach to building impact investment portfolios has been diverse, and we have focused our portfolio construction skills on areas like air, water, soil, oceans. And I asked Douglas a number of months ago his perspective on the philosophy of building separate portfolios, and he said to me, nature doesn't parse these out. Why would we in the investment process? And that was such an important statement when we think about building this holistic approach to impact. And so we have been working very hard on the construction of what will be the Newday Impact One portfolio or fund, which we will be bringing to market in early 2024. There's a lot more detail behind that. Certainly, there are a very large set of contributors to that, given the work that is going on with the EBF community and others around bringing something to market that is highly differentiated, that includes asset classes that will likely have the most significant impact when we talk about air, water, soil, biodiversity, equity, and carbon.
Thanks. Now we're going to move to a question and answer session, but we've also been joined, due to some technical difficulties, by Ted Schmidt from the Allen Institute for AI. And Douglas, I know that you have been working with the Allen Institute to think about how to apply EBF using a combination of AI, blockchain, and a variety of other issues. Can you talk together a little bit about that project?
Well, yeah, Ted has been, and hey, great to see you, Ted. Ted has been with EBF since the very beginning. He's very valuable to the group because he really understands from a conservation standpoint, not only why conservationists have such a hard time telling their story, but also why large philanthropic institutions, foundations, have a hard time measuring impact. So maybe, Ted, you could speak to how EBF can be helpful on both those fronts.
Sure. Yeah, so conservation does have a really hard time talking about the impacts it has. And in fact, there's no common language for doing so. Every funder, whether it's a government funder, a philanthropic funder, has a different set of reporting requirements because they are basically making them up as they go. And there's no common language to be able to express the impacts that you're having as a conservationist. So you're dealing one-on-one with every funder you're trying to propose to explain to them what impacts you're going to have. And then measuring those impacts is also extremely difficult. We touched on a few of the things. It's a huge causal chain. There's not a one-to-one link of, delivered this because of this action. It's a collection of actions that gets you the results. And I think this is where EBF comes in, is it creates this common language for expressing the impacts across a range of potential actions that you're taking. The simple language of let's see, six different areas, water, soil, those are really nice. They're real, they're concrete, but they also express the range of potential impacts that you can have. Of course, we have to get adoption on both sides of this. So like any standard, you have to get adoption. And if funders started asking for results and impacts in the language of EBF, it would actually be a huge burden lift on the conservation NGOs, because they would know and they would learn the tools that EBF provides to be able to express the impacts they're having. And they know that if they express them in those terms, that they can now access a whole a whole range of funders, whoever is bought into it, rather than having to basically create a language for each and every funder. Maybe I'll stop there. What was the first? I think I addressed the second one. Douglas, what was the first one again?
Well, I think Mitch raised a really interesting point about the role. Obviously at Allen AI, you're using a lot of technology, right?
Yeah.
People often talk about the global South having a really difficult time, let's say, in a carbon market, because they don't have access to that same trusted methodology and measurement. They often talk about blockchain as being potential to be an equalizer, and I want to underscore that the work of EBF, the first phase of that work was funded by Ripple, and then the second phase of that work was actually funded by Blockchain for Climate. So we certainly see the value of blockchain, but maybe Ted, you can talk about blockchain and technology having the possibility to actually more like to democratize the way data is gathered and shared.
Sure. I'm much more conversant, obviously, in AI, given that I'm at the Allen Institute for AI. But whether it's blockchain or AI or any of these emerging technologies, this democratization is actually really critical. And it's actually the gap that we try and fill at AI2, at the Allen Institute for AI2, is making this technology available to those developing countries, to the global south, because they otherwise wouldn't have access to it. It's too expensive. The commercial companies charge very large numbers per seat to get access to the data, to the technology, and we're trying to fill that gap. We really, and this is why, as Douglas knows, is why I joined and have participated in EBF from the beginning, is that what I see is ultimately the current funders, philanthropic and government funders, they don't provide the long-term support you need to have forever technology. You need markets to provide that, and that's what EBF has the potential to help fill. Is to give a language for investors on the financing side to understand the results, the long-term results that will be delivered. Governments and private philanthropy are great for that early stage funding. Bringing technology like blockchain, like AI, like all the compute involved in running those, that's forever funding, and that's really boring for a philanthropist. That's really, governments are too short-termish to be able to deal with that. We need markets to be able to support those long-term investments. Is that, Douglas, that sort of address what you were looking at? Yeah.
So let me ask you a question, because we're using the metaphor of Bluetooth, which I think is very important. We're enabling comparability of these various factors. And of course, a lot of ESG reporting has been influenced by marketing, which puts spin on information in order to make it less comparable and more opaque. When you think about a framework, does that also include a global definition of sustainability? Will I be able to plug these numbers in and go, is this sustainable? Or do we need, as Drea and Philip called out earlier, more local context? How, Douglas, will the EBF evolve guidance to help people understand the data they're seeing?
I think sustainability as a concept is intermediate.
Mm-hmm.
It's something we're going to move beyond, because you can make the most sustainable food product in the world and then serve it in single-use plastic, and you've negated all the benefits you've created. So our definition of sustainability, sadly, is not holistic. It's the same reason why true cost accounting and the circular economy just focus on minimizing negative externalities, don't actually explain the positive impacts that you're trying to generate from your activities. So we have to move away from the common framing mechanisms we use to talk about things. And I would argue that sustainability has been certainly valuable, but it's an interim or intermediate concept. But I will say that when you give people greater visibility into something and allow them to make purchases according to their values, you can change entire sectors. When people learned what a cage-free egg was, the entire poultry sector changed overnight. When people learned that there were growth hormones in milk, the dairy industry changed overnight. When people learned that there were antibiotics in meat, that sector had to change. We have an opaque food system because we don't buy food for nutrition. We buy food on the cheapest possible price. Yeah. And the cheapest possible price model works because it's opaque. If we actually understood what that model was, we wouldn't support it. We're going to see the same thing in financial markets. We're going to see the same thing in people's activities. We need to make it clear. It's 6 words. It's the 6 words of EBF. We need to get people to understand that instead of doing less bad, we should focus on doing more good. Right. Because ironically, when you do more good, you actually do less bad. Who would have thought that, right? So if we can create that model, that's very, very powerful.
And I would add, Douglas, I spot on, and I would add, and I know Drea makes this point a lot, we need to give the people on the ground that are creating that more good a way to express the more good in a way that makes sense to them, instead of imposing our language, the funder language on them to say, tell us in our terms. We need to give them the language to tell us in their terms how they're providing benefits, and have a common language, a common syntax to do that. And that's really what I see EBF role as.
Yeah.
We have a related question from the audience about the other 3 of the 9 planetary boundaries. Is there an intention to expand EBF to address those in the future?
I think that EBF is, I think the planetary boundaries are really, really amazing, but they don't address the positive impacts that we need to be focusing on. Again, this is I would put the 9 planetary boundaries in a group that I would call crisis pornography, right? So we can continually focus on how bad we're doing and show how bad we're doing. We can create graphs and charts and really amazing videos of polar bears and ice flows, or we can actually focus on how we're going to solve these problems. And so we know that these 6 areas are the most important areas that we need to be focusing on. So I think the 9 planetary boundaries are amazing, but I would also call them middleware because they're explaining the problem in really eloquent terms. But I think that it's 2024, and we got to start focusing on what the solutions are and the positive impacts and get everybody going in the same direction.
Well, let me ask about a practical application. And Ashlan, you're launching an omega-3 oils nutraceutical line of products. Ironically, using what the krill eat to make their omega-3. So you're taking the middlemen out. You're using algae. How will Sudwar use the EBF to express, potentially even to consumers, the benefits that it's creating for the planet?
I mean, like I said before, the use of krill is really the largest climate catastrophe that nobody knows about. So for us, we really see Sudwar coming into it as a way to save the ocean. And if we can win, I should say, we get these 3 marine protected areas in place, it will be 1% of our ocean. Like Andrea said, getting us closer to that 30 by 30. We cannot really truly get 30 by 30 unless we protect the Southern Ocean. But it's not just about the Southern Ocean. Mm-hmm. Sorry, grandpa-in-law. But this is about people. It's about the planet. It's about soil. It's about the air. It's about oxygen. I mean, it really is about all of these different touch points. And rather than trying to look at the inputs, we need to look at the outcomes. And that's what's really exciting about this. And we're still in the middle of raising funds for our business, but once we're up and running, we are definitely using the ecological benefits because it makes sense. And it will not only allow us to talk to governments and leaders, but it'll also allow us to talk to consumers and show them that this product is not sustainable. We're going beyond sustainable. We're talking about restoration. And this product is going to leave people and the planet better. And that's really what all companies should be striving for. This is what all consumers should be looking for. And this is what all governments should be trying to do. And I think that that's really exciting. It's all, we can't, like Douglas said, so much of the environmental movement has been naysayers and telling people what not to do. We have to stop doing that. We need to show people that there's better options and that there are things that they can do that are better for them and better for the planet, and that they'll make money. So I think that, we have to recognize that this is a market-based world that we live in, and let's use that to our benefit. And let's make these products and make businesses and hold businesses and governments to a higher standards. And that is not just talking about carbon, but talking about food and water and, everything that really this framework lays out.
I've never met a climate denier who, when they learned they could make money from solving the climate problem, objected anymore.
Exactly.
I mean, there's a great story, Lisa. I'd love to dig it up. A bunch of ranchers in Texas that are very much climate deniers, but man, have they embraced wind power, because they make all sorts of gobs of money doing it, right? They don't care about the climate, but we don't need them to care about it. Douglas, I've made this point actually when I talked about our principles. We actually don't need people to buy into our principles. If they buy into this because they make money, great. As long as it's the right outcome, that's what we care about.
You know, let me ask Douglas, how do you envision brand managers in the future potentially using EBF? You know, I'm a publisher of sustainable living information. Will I be able to expect a company to present this information to me? Or rather, how should I impose upon them the expectation?
Well, you know, Mitch, so first of all, I have to say, we weren't supposed to be talking about EBF yet. We were working under the radar. We weren't talking about it. We had no website. We are only doing this because Doug Heske and Newday forced our hand and said, we're going to announce this thing at Climate Week. So we had to make a decision whether we were going to slightly part the curtain to talk about it. But listen, let's be frank. Everything we've expressed to you has happened in 12 months, which is on one level remarkable, but it's also, we have a roadmap in front of us. We have to create EBF Commons. There's somebody wrote, and David Fortson wrote in the chat, could companies use EBF? You bet. Absolutely. David, what I envision with EBF Commons is 2 years from now, as Ted so eloquently pointed out about foundations and NGOs and people in conservation space, I would imagine, because I already know this because the World Food Program has already explained this to me, you'll go to EBF Commons in a year from now. Why? Because the World Food Program or a philanthropic institution or a VC is going to say, you know what? I love what you're doing. Send me your EBF. And you go to EBF Commons and you'll create a profile for yourself that expresses your activities in terms of the Ecological Benefit Framework. And now it's game on. Now you can talk about it. You know, Ashlan, and when you were talking about krill and you cited all these benefits, I call that sea foam. When you're walking on that beach and that beautiful wave hits and there's that beautiful foam there and then it evaporates. If we don't have a way to capture all of these benefits when we're talking about something in an armature or framework that can be easily shared with somebody else, then it becomes anecdotal, right? Or one person's co-benefits is somebody's benefits. So they have to be all expressed equally. And so I think that's what EBF will be useful for companies that have individual products, or NGOs that want to explain their total activities, or an individual project that they have. So you could see at a glance with a dashboard the impacts that they're contributing to.
Well, and so Tom Cook, who's the CEO of an amazing biodegradable shoe made with algae-based foam, is talking about the bad as well as the good. Andrea, you have an observation about why we need to think mostly about the good. Could you talk to that?
Yeah, I actually believe that the framework works into the negative and into the positive. And when you think about people, when they're taking action, usually they're starting in a negative space and they're trying to get back to zero. And then we want them to keep going into the positive, where we're looking at restorative functions.
You know, Mitch, I would ask you to think about this. It turns out, Mitch, that Bluetooth does not tell you whether you should buy a Samsung phone or not. That's not Bluetooth's role. Bluetooth is an enabling technology. Just as Ted said, EBF has no role in expressing its values and imposing those on somebody else. We are there as an enabling technology. We have to get philanthropic activities, government agencies, impact investing, ESG reporting, carbon markets to express themselves in the same way, because it's 2024. We have to start identifying that these are the 6 things that matter most, and we need to move in the same direction. So EBF's role is simply to help enable people to express their activities. Other people will come in and create certifications and measurements using EBF. Power to them, it's free market. But we're just focused on that handshake for the planet.
Well, and as the former networking editor of MacWeek, and I covered the launch of Bluetooth, it's an important point. It's not just the analogy to Bluetooth, but we also at that time got rid of all those proprietary cables that were required to connect everything that we used to our computer or to any other device. And what we're doing now is taking down the walls so this data is truly comparable and easily so.
That's Mitch, that's absolutely right. We've got to remove those walls. And in fact, people are leveraging the fact that the reporting is opaque, that we don't have a common language, including, by the way, the auditors in the carbon markets, that they are leveraging the fact that this is all opaque. But this is the power of what EBF brings, is to break down those walls and create a common language. It shouldn't be value laden. Now, we could come from our values and why we were motivated to create EBF, but EBF is not trying to impose any values on anyone. It's trying to create a common language of expression, so that everyone has a way to bring the values that they're bringing in a positive way, and have people fund that. So, yeah.
Doug, you obviously must be thinking about this from the financial and investment perspective. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I'll share another story with you, and this is something that has been reinforced by a couple of people today. Douglas was talking about the fact that we're delivering sustainable seafood on a plastic plate, right? So we're undoing much of the good that we're trying to do. So it was a number of years ago that we were spending time with one of the families that we work with, and the principal of that family walked into the head of the family office and asked him a question. He said, okay, we're giving hundreds of thousands of dollars every year to the Rainforest Action Network to save the Redwoods League. And I'm looking at our investment portfolio, and we have all of this exposure to clear-cutting organizations, right, that are chopping down forests in the Pacific Northwest. How does that sync? So it comes back to this idea that we've got to bring consistency in this decision-making amongst grant funders, investors, and then consumers as well, in terms of how they're making their own consumer purchasing decisions.
Drea, I want to also ask from the other end of this discussion, the indigenous people, the qualitative knowledge that we were talking about earlier is so important to bring into the comparable space. But how do we do that? And I guess part of my question is, how do we all become indigenous to the places we are, in the sense that an indigenous community really understands their environment?
Yeah, so first of all, I want to apologize that I haven't brought my co-founders. They're both indigenous and they speak Spanish, so they usually don't come to these meetings. But I get to hear a lot from them about their perspective. And indigenous groups are, infamous for having a fairly holistic perspective, but also completely different paradigms. And right now we work with 30 independent indigenous nations in 5 continents and 10 countries on the biodiversity credit. So I get to hear a lot from them. This language does work. It does translate well. So they do talk about air, they talk about water, they talk about animals or biodiversity. Carbon's not really so much one of the things, but equity is definitely a huge one. So I feel like this framework works a lot. And I just want to call out to Apple's recent corporate report. And if you listen to that corporate report when they're doing their report and they're doing their accountability to nature, they're using that language. They're using, what have we done for soil? The benefit of this framework is, I think Apple's been criticized for failing to include biodiversity in that report. And we feel 200 experts from around the globe, many different disciplines, grassroots, top down, traders, all feel that these 6 words are going to cover it. Like we've got it. And now we can start working on what we're going to do.
Douglas, do you see an opportunity to help consumers better understand their relationship with the planet through this kind of information? Because you've developed a very simple, iconic language that we'll be able to use to communicate.
I got an email yesterday from somebody who explained the helplessness that millennials and Gen Z feel today, that they are powerless, that they have no ability to stop a world on fire and have no way to put it out. And they've entrusted all of these people in certain positions, whether it's in government, whether it's in the corporate world, to take hold and handle and address these challenges, and they failed them. And so I gave you the analogy a few minutes ago of the cage-free egg and of hormones in milk and of antibiotics in meat. We have a very opaque financial system. People do not feel that they have any ability to shift the levers of power to better reflect the world they want to see or their values. And the way that you address that opaqueness starts by having, as Ted said, a common language. We have to move in the same direction. So we can say you're either part of the solution or you're in the do less harm, cover your ass model that is not part of the solution. And increasingly, consumers are going to demand accountability from the products they buy, from the political candidates that they support, because I think that we can give them a framework now to allow them to understand what those 6 things are, why they're important, how they permeate every aspect of our daily lives, and that you can make decisions when you buy things to support that. And I think it's why EBF was created with a bottom-up model, because this is how you create a much more adaptive model that can reflect who is creating the benefits and how to support them.
So we have another practical question from the audience. And Andrea, I think this is a good one for you. What do coral reefs have to do with ocean health generally and ocean protection? How should we think about the greater system than just the Southern Ocean?
Well, sure. I think actually Ashlan said she wanted to talk about the coral reefs, but that's, just in terms of the greater ocean, I think scientists have told us that in order to protect a certain level of biodiversity, you have to protect at least 30% of the ocean, probably more than that. That's actually a really conservative estimate. So, while I'm not actually an expert at all on coral reefs in particular, every single ecosystem within the ocean is important because it houses different species, and we want to make sure that the biodiversity is protected. But I'll let Ashlan add to that.
And Ashlan, we're not only talking about protecting 30% of the oceans, but 30% of the forests. You're finding a lot of resistance to the idea of more marine protected areas. What can we do to overcome that?
Yeah, the poor ocean, right? I think Philippe and I talk about this all the time. We think that the ocean is has largely been left out of these conversations. And our best guess is because we're all terrestrial beings, right? We're all on land. We know land. We live on the land, and we can see the land. So it's the ocean that gets left off a lot. And you're right. 30 by 30 is 30% of land protected and 30% of our ocean protected by 2030. And while I think the krill issue is the largest climate catastrophe that no one knows about, coral reefs are one of the largest climate catastrophes that everybody knows about, and we're still trying to figure out what to do. I mean, coral reefs are literally the building blocks of our civilization because coral reefs are limestone. So if you look at anything from the Roman pillars to the White House, it's all old coral reef. About over 90% of all fish around the planet spend some of their days on coral reefs. So if we're talking about food security, we need to thank coral reefs. Coral reefs are hugely biodiverse, as Andrea said, and truly we, in the face of storm surge, coral reefs are our best protection. I mean, they really serve us so well. And I also want to give a shout out to Ted and the Allen Institute for what they have done on the coral mapping of actually just mapping our coral reefs around the planet, because we didn't have any of that before. So thank you for that. But again, this is one of those things where we need to think about, we have to keep the ocean at the center of the conversations when we talk about climate change. The Southern Ocean and coral reefs are some of the top. There's also overfishing. There's, pollution that's going in and out of our ocean. I mean, sadly, the list goes on and on. But that's why these conversations and these solutions are so important, because we can't, as the old head of NOAA said, an incredible woman, she said, many people look at the ocean that it's too large to fail. Well, that's not true. It's in a really bad state right now. And what we need to look at is the ocean as our biggest ally in fighting many of these issues. It is our largest carbon sink. It is producing most of our oxygen, and it's feeding billions of people around the planet. So again, we have to look at the ocean as not a victim, but as a solution and as an ally. Here we go.
Here's FEMA.
For a warning. Thank you for the pre-warning on that. This is a test, everybody. We were told ahead, so don't freak out. But glad it's working.
We're all safe.
We're all safe.
So I want to ask you, because the Allen Coral Atlas is a great example of, first, shining light. creating accountability, but it's also important to storytelling. How do you use it to tell that story about coral?
So it absolutely is important to storytelling. You know, the common thread through all the things that Paul Allen did, though often people don't realize it, was leveraging technology to create data. And then you can use that data in many ways. You can use it for storytelling. You can use it for policy making. You can use it for investing, which, by the way, barely has been, and that's what EBF is trying to fill. So it's that thing that Paul was always looking for. How do I help the world through scalable things and shining a light? I don't know if anyone noticed. Well, I know we had a lot of EBF activities during UNGA and Climate Week. I also signed an MOU with the IUCN to support the implementation of the BBNJ, the Beyond Boundaries of National Jurisdiction, so the high seas, MPAs, of course, ChemLAR and the Arctic is part of that. And that, again, is that theme of providing the data. Now, the problem with that is the data is not useful in and of itself. It has to be used to be expressed in a way that there's a common language. And this is the gap that EBF fills. So I'm very proud of the work that we've done and the range of things from Skylight with the recently and hopefully supporting the high seas implementation, MPA implementation, Coral Atlas. We did continent-wide surveys of elephants, the Great Elephant Census, and on and on. These things are great, but ultimately they're just the first step. They're creating the data needed. I think the theme here is that data, the lack of data, has often been an excuse used. The lack of data, there is not a lack of data. Could we get more data? We can always get more data. But we have so many satellites in the air now. We have so many sensing devices. We have AI to process these massive volumes of data. It's expensive, and this is the gap we're trying to fill. What we're lacking is a way to express that data in a way that markets can invest in. It's even hard for philanthropists or governments to invest in it because there isn't a common language. It has been virtually impossible for markets to do so. And so we're trying to knock down lack of data as an excuse. I think we're getting close to doing that collectively. Now we need to knock down, we have no language to express the impact based on the data.
Well, now, Douglas, you already are doing an ocean health ETF. It trades under the ticker AHOY. So you are applying data and doing storytelling about all of these challenges. How are you making those decisions, and what data has informed you thus far, and how does EBF change that?
Well, at the Lexicon, we've always believed that data is not really useful for most people unless you can put a face and a place on it. And so you have to make data contextual to and relevant to people's lives. So when we've done 24 case studies that we'll start releasing in November from projects all over the world expressed in terms of EBF. And Mitch, I'll be frank with you, pretty crazy journey, man, because you can gather a tremendous amount of data, but there's also, data fatigue, right? So you have to figure out how to express that top line data. So at a glance, you can have a snapshot where you can say at a glance, this project is mainly focused on water. It does these other things, but it's mainly focused on water. And then reward people for going deeper and deeper and deeper, and constantly provide them with deeper and deeper, more relevant data. So you have to, first of all, think about data as scalable so that you can address multiple audiences. There's the people that just want the snapshot. There's people that want to go deeper. So in the case studies that we're going to be that have digital fingerprints and are fully interactive, the most powerful thing about them, Mitch, is that they're going to explain contextually so much information that will have you really understand what all of these ecological benefits are, what all the practices somebody uses, the ways that they measure that. And it's really going to rapidly increase people's literacy and fluency to show them the complexities that these people are addressing to try to solve really big problems.
Doug, you're doing an ocean health ETF now, and the question that's on the screen at the moment is, I think, a really relevant one. How are you using this today to track the outcomes of the portfolio, not simply the financial results.
Yeah, so let me make an opening comment about that. So I think that Douglas and everybody that's commented on data are spot on. Like, we don't need another data provider. There's massive amounts of data out there. What we need is better interpretation of that data. And that's what we do as an organization. We are drawing in massive amounts of data from a variety of different players, but there is some level of subjectivity in it. And so even early on in Newday's investment process, we were gathering data from MSCI, Occam, Sustainalytics, a lot of the big data providers, but it ended up becoming meaningless. And it was oftentimes in conflict with one another. So you have to know what you're looking for. The most important thing for us on a go-forward basis is making sure that we're putting data in the hands of consumers so that they are armed to make better decisions. And what we always liken this to is that in California, there was this movement afoot a number of years ago to put calorie counts on menus, right? So consumers today can now sit down in a restaurant and understand whether or not, they're consuming 150 calories for a vegan meal or vegetarian meal or 500 calories for a cheeseburger. It doesn't mean that they can't order the cheeseburger, but when they have that information, they're going to make better decisions. So what we're doing is we're starting on our ocean health portfolio that's available as an SMA and, of course, as an ETF right now, and laying in that narrative into the description of each one of the portfolio constituents that we have inside that portfolio. So that when people are looking at, is this portfolio, as an example, creating real good, they have a mechanism for evaluation. On top of that, and I want to reinforce this again, but portfolio building, investing ain't enough. And this is what's so important around building these market-based solutions, because we need people to be pulling together here and using all of these impacts or all of these avenues for impact to drive transformation.
Dre, thinking back to what you've learned on the ground in Colombia, those qualitative experiences can be put together in different combinations in order to see into different challenges. What advice do you have from the indigenous perspective, and recognizing that you represent a group of indigenous people, that you are not indigenous? I want to be clear about that. How can we learn from what they integrate in their knowledge and apply it in, for instance, financial decision making or as a consumer?
Well, I think from the indigenous people that we work with have a much more holistic view of ecosystems. It's just pure conserved or it's not. And really what this is more of a tool for them to communicate to financial markets. Mm-hmm. So when you're trying to conserve or change indigenous activism, which basically means keep this jungle healthy based on all the sensory inputs that I have and my traditional knowledge, versus talking to an investor in Europe or the US where they're like, what exactly did you do? This tool set helps people communicate better in a more culturally appropriate way.
Do you see the finances starting to flow to incent and give these people a livelihood protecting our environment?
Yes. So our project stops deforestation on one end. In other words, we've just given them enough money to keep doing what they're already doing for 5,000 years. And on the other end, we sell six basically climate products, including biodiversity, carbon, and water credits. So what we've done is we've separated those different credits into, because they're different activities. So we stack, we don't bundle. But other projects tend to bundle. So I know a project that has in Mexico, and they were part of EBF, and they had a biodiversity carbon credit bundled. But on the ground, all those six benefits tend to be equal. So, but when you're talking to a buyer and you're trying to tag MRV, data, certification, whatever, it really helps to be able to split it up into something simple that everybody else understands.
I want to ask you a follow-up question in a moment about the acronym MRV. But Ashlan, I know you have to go. I want to thank you for spending time with us today. It was wonderful to have you.
Thank you all so much to my fellow presenters, and thank you to everybody on this call. We can do it together, right? So thanks you all.
Drea, and MRV. People who want to participate should understand this term.
Because one of the ongoing debates we had in the EBF was how are we talking about certification, not certification, self-report, data? Like, so MRV is measurement, reporting, and verification. And for carbon, it might be a little bit more standardized, although that's still debatable. But for water, it's still emerging. And for biodiversity, it's still emerging. So what we ended up discovering kind of through the group consensus, and this is still evolving, is that there's basically a spectrum between self-report. So I say that I do air credits. MRV, which is that I have data to prove I have a dragonfly, an apex predator for the insect world, to show my air quality. And then certification, which is that some external biologist that I paid came in and looked at it and said, yep, you've got a dragonfly. So, or did our particulate samples or whatever. And we've seen this kind of spectrum evolving for each of the 6 co-benefits. And I believe climate markets are really going to evolve much more in the next 10 years. We're already seeing Verra adding equity measurements into their CCB and requiring it for all carbon projects. I think we will see better third-party certification, but in the interim, we need people to be able to self-report if they don't have the funding to get third-party certification, and or include way more efficient metrics for measurement, reporting, and verification, like satellite monitoring. For instance, Space Intelligence is the company backing Verra's new standard, and they've mapped the entire country of Tanzania for carbon. And that's MRV. That's just satellite monitoring. It might not necessarily need to be certified if you have good enough measurement, reporting, and verification. That's real time, similar to what TED provides.
Let me just add really quickly to that, because I think this is really important. Is that we technologists can produce any data that people need. Well, not any, but we can produce a lot of data. We need to know what data to produce. And actually, Drea has a really nice example. Scientists want individual IDs of animals. They want to know each and every animal for very good science reasons. But markets don't actually need that. What they need is presence, absence. They need the use of the space. And so knowing that, we can produce data easier, more cheaply, whatever it is, if we know that, and if there's a way to express that, which EBF provides, then we can produce the data that's needed. Right now, if we have a scientist tell us we need this type of data, well, we end up producing that, and it may not serve the purposes that we need it for market. So I think this is being able to tell us what data to produce is what we technologists need. And
we have a layman's question, and by the way, there may be a genetic connection to the questioner and me. But I've tried to explain what I do to my father for many years. How can people get involved in beginning to collect and curate these stories in such a way that they can create local context?
You know, we're all storytellers, it turns out. And we've been storytellers since the beginning of time. Started around campfires at night, right? We had to relate what happened in our day, and we transmitted knowledge that way. What I found in the 15 years at the Lexicon is that everybody has a story, but they often don't know the format of how to express that story. And so EBF allows somebody to tell their story in a templatized way. It gives you the prompts, the questions that allow you to explain yourself in a way that's gonna be understood by another person. And so,
Douglas, yeah. I would add, it does it in a way that is universally understandable. Those 6 words, everyone knows what water is. Everyone knows what soil is. They don't know what MRVs are. They don't know about blockchains. They don't understand AI. They don't need to, but they know what soil and water and life is. They know those 6 terms, and it gives them a way to express it in those 6 terms that are universally understood.
In storytelling, Ted, that's called a penetrated story, where you have to provide on the surface something that at a glance you know what it is. And then the deeper you go in, there's going to be information there all the way down to the level of the domain expertise of an expert who is going to want to then take that information and build something with it. So I think that has been part of the architecture from the very beginning. Mitch, I just want to quickly tackle what Rod pointed out in the chat, which I want to end on this note, which is that Rod pointed out, great stuff. I want you to do X, Y, and Z and build X, Y, and Z and ABC. No, Rod, you're going to build that. You identified a need and you're going to solve it. The reason why Bluetooth is so powerful is you have a phone and all of a sudden people start making apps that use Bluetooth, because they identified a need in a free market economy and they built something because they were entrepreneurs and they solved a problem. You just identified a problem. So my answer to you is, Rod, when are you going to build that? Why aren't you building that right now? Because that's how you build a framework that has mass adoption. So that everybody realizes that actually they're going to be the one who builds it. They're going to be the one who solves that problem.
And there will be immense amounts of new data based on all of the technology that is being deployed now to add incredible depth and granularity to the stories that we're telling. Now, Doug, investments are stories. How are you using the EBF in the One Fund? And I know you have an additional announcement with regard to the One Fund that you want to share, but what's the story that you are now able to tell that the EBF is available to begin to use and curate this information?
So, Mitch, I think that, relative to the Newday Impact One, there are a number of super exciting things that are under development right now that we'll begin talking about that tie into the relationship with EBF and with the Lexicon, that bring about what I would describe as a very, very different experience for anybody that is responsibly minded and wants to align capital with those things that they care most about. And I want to talk for just a moment about what I think is driving this. I don't like the narrative that we're living in. The extinction of krill and fish species, climate change, global warming, authoritarianism. I think that we've all come to recognize that we as a society are not as invulnerable as any other big empire from the past, and that we've been sitting on this decadent pedestal of infallibility for some time. That has to change. And we've understood that all the stuff that we've been talking about on the call today, is not just over there anymore. So there's a very important prompt that's been running on the banner here throughout this call. And that is, can we change the future? The answer to that is yes. Unequivocally, it is yes. And the beautiful thing about the EBF is that it serves as a tool from which all of us can do that. And we have to be believers in change. We have to build new narratives. We have to make our decisions count. And we have to encourage everybody that we know to be joining us on this journey. There is one more thing that I'd like to say, or actually two more things that I'd like to say about EBF. That our model historically has always been to take a large percent of our revenues as a B corporation and drive them back into these super important causes. And then on the EBF Newday, I'm not going to call it EBF, but on Newday Impact One Fund, we are going to be taking 15% of all revenues that are generated in that portfolio and driving that back into EBF so that they can continue to do the groundwork, beyond the groundwork that they and only they can do. The other thing that I'd like to share, which is more relative to the oceans program that we're running, is there was a very important event that happened last week, and that was that Schmidt Marine Technology Partners is immediately funding the oceans program with a grant that allows us to kick off this program, get the activator started. We feel very confident that there'll be a series of additional funders that are coming in over the next 30 days to join Schmidt Marine Technology Partners in this endeavor. So as I said on the front end of this call, in the 2.5 decades that I've spent working on or in the impact investment business, there has been nothing that has the possibility and is now being delivered and is more exciting than the work that's going on with EBF. So I would point you to the banners relative to where you can find more information at canyouchangethefuture.org. If you want to learn more about the oceans program, go to Newday Impact. And if you want to have a personal conversation about any of this, please feel free to reach out to me, anybody on our team, or to Douglas Gayeton as well. There's a lot more to share.
Douglas, with the EBF Commons beginning to see funding and all of this support, what can people do to get involved, and what kinds of roles in that Commons are you seeking to bring people into?
So we use a model called an activator, which is like an accelerator for good ideas, where we bring people together in a highly structured format and reach an outcome in 6 months. The work that you've seen today from EBF came out of an activator that Ted and others were involved in. Philippe, who's here today, was one of the leaders of it as well. That next sprint is going to have 6 streams, one for each of the ecological benefits. We'll have about 100 domain experts in each one of those streams to build out what a curated MRV library is. How do you actually measure and express a benefit in a way that even somebody on the ground in the global south can use to express the value of their project? So we're doing that across 6 benefits. And then we have another work stream that's specifically focused on building the governance model for what will become like ebfcommons.org. ebfcommons.org is going to be able to do a number of things. One, help people to explain a project or an NGO or a company or a product using this framework. It'll be an amazing landing point for that. But also, it's going to be able to give microgrants. It's going to be able to fund people on the ground that are developing their own methodologies for how to capture the benefits that they're creating in a way that is not bound or limited by their access to expertise or technology. So I think these microgrants to help people on the ground is going to be vital in really building a bottom-up model for how we provide resources and support for people that are safeguarding so much of these resources that are so valuable to all of us.
The system that we're seeking to change has been imposed largely from the top down for the past century, and change begins in our hearts and minds and blossoms through action, folks. It's an incredible time. Polycrisis represents an opportunity to change almost everything. And I hope that everyone listening today will take a few minutes at canyouchangethefuture.org to learn more about the EBF, the Ecological Benefits Framework. Since we're using acronyms, I want to be clear. Speak the name and tell your friends. Let's get everybody looking at this and understanding it. I want to thank each of our speakers today. Doug Heske, Andrea, Matt, Douglas Gayeton, Philippe, and Ted for joining us and speaking your minds. Folks, it's on all of us. Take a moment, take a step, and let's change this world. Thank you all for your time today.
Thank you.